Hello, everyone. This is Mangini again with my new celebrity interview. And this time I'm joined by none other than Mark Mangini, an Oscar winning, Emmy winning, BAFTA winning, and many other accolade winning sound designer for films, and the mastermind behind such soundtracks as those for Blade Runner 2049, Mad Max Fury Road, Dune, and many other movies that we all know. Mark, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Max. It's a pleasure to be here. And as I said earlier, I can't wait to see where this conversation leads.
Me too. Um, I come prepared. I have my notes, so I'll be consulting to them every now and then. And I am a subtitler, so the questions will be related to that mostly, except for the first one, which is kind of more general. Perhaps
Mhm.
for the viewers who don't quite know you, could you please guide us through your professional journey from the early days and up until now?
Sure. Um, I Let me start by saying that I didn't know as a young man or as even as a teenager that people do what I do for a living. I started doing stop motion animation and claymation in junior high and high school, and that's where I developed a love for cinema. And it was in 1975 that I watched the Academy Awards on television, and that really struck me. And I thought, that's what I want to do with my life. I would end up going to college. My university studies were in foreign languages because I didn't think there was an actual career in cinema for me. I had never formally studied it. Um, and I thought I'd be an interpreter for the United Nations, which I thought would be a fun job, but my language skills are very poor. So
Mm.
I saw the Academy Awards in 1975, and that's when it all connected for me that I'm making films on my own. This is a deep love of mine. I have to go to Hollywood, which is, the heart of filmmaking in the United States, and seek my fortune, if you will, there. So I drove to Los Angeles and landed in somebody's guest house with no skills, no connections, no understanding of the industry whatsoever. But I was very fortunate in that the person I was living with knew somebody at Hanna-Barbera Studios.
Mm.
Hanna-Barbera is famous for American Saturday morning cartoons like Scooby-Doo and the Flintstones. And they would end up offering me an option to go to a training program in their sound department. That was the only opening that they had. And I just jumped at it. I thought, I'll take anything. I just want to be in this business. And then the rest is kind of history. I loved sound. I was trained as a sound effects editor, and I made funny, cartoon sounds for Saturday morning kids shows for 4 years. And then a friend of mine left our department to work at Paramount Studios. That's where grown-ups work. That's where adults work making real movies. And that same year, Star Wars came out, and I was overwhelmed with the complexity and the contribution that sound made to the enjoyment of the movie. And I thought, yep, that's what I want to do. I want to be Ben Burt. I want to make sounds for movies. So I called my friend Bill and said, get me out of here. And he got me a job at Paramount Studios. And my first film at Paramount was Star Trek: The Motion Picture, of a highly anticipated, it was the movie of the year that year in 1979, I think it was. And on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, I would meet Robert Wise, the great director, and I would meet two gentlemen who would become future business partners, Richard Anderson and Stephen Hunter Flick. And after Star Trek, we decided that we wanted to be an independent sound entity, and we formed a company. And just after that, Richard got offered Raiders of the Lost Ark through his relationship with Ben Burt at the University of Southern California. They were classmates there. And then it was just, then 49 years later, I just kept studying sound and trying to be the best I could at it. And there's this. I'm Italian. I'm 100% Italian. I'm second generation, and I know inside of me is a little Geppetto, a little craftsperson who just wants to make beautiful things for the sake of it. For the sake of it. So that's my story.
That's perfect. Quite inspirational to me at least. All these things and things have changed so much throughout the decades in sound. Um, you were the sound editor for 32 Sounds, which is this fascinating exploration of the world of sound and
Mm.
its nature and philosophy and what it does to us in our life, what effect it has, but also the absence of it for those who are deaf. And that movie, it comes with closed captions, which were made, according to the end credits, by Matt Lauterbach in consultation with Matt Bivens and Delbert Wetter. Which, by the way, thanks so much to whoever added them to the end credits. That happens almost never in our profession, getting credit.
Ah. Hmm.
So they did I think, a great job, and they added the dialogue in the captions, but also descriptions of sounds.
Ah. I haven't seen that.
No, I even wrote down some of my favorites. Just a few, let me tell you. One was eggy fart. Eggy fart, the sound. Oh, eggy, that's
I don't know. Okay.
yes, so that's one. Cat purring contentedly. We all
Beautiful.
know that's
Very
very
descriptive.
gong sounds modulating as if underwater. Very elaborate and specific. Also,
Yeah.
there's complete silence. Just a description, complete silence, which isn't a sound, but maybe it is because it can be narratively significant. It's like an anti-sound, right? So that can matter. There was also thwack, thwack with an exclamation mark for the sound of
Automata,
the golf club. Mhm.
automatopoeia, as we say in English.
Exactly.
A sound, a word that describes a sound, which is a sound that describes a word.
It's sometimes if you want to be playful, you do that. It's kind of frowned upon generally, but a little bit. No?
Ah, interesting.
Yeah,
I
and
love that word.
my favorite was shin shin, a caption. You probably know what it means. It's a Japanese term for the sound of snow falling, which
Right,
they show it in the film,
right.
scene with snowfall, and
Yeah.
this sound is added there. I'm pretty sure you were one who did that, probably, or at least someone. And the caption goes shin shin. And that's
Hmm.
so poetic and beautiful to me. Um, so my question to you is, how do you feel about these captions? Do you feel like they kind of convey and respect your creative idea as the sound designer of this full movie?
Uh, well, based on what you just said to me for 32 sounds, I'm deeply impressed because my experience of closed captioning is that there's usually much less poetic version of that in parentheses in the closed captions that says something like gunshot, not gunshot from a distance with a loud crack or gunshot with a decay off of the hills, because those are all the attributes that I try to imbue in sound so that there's always nuance for those that can hear in the sounds that I create. So I'm thrilled to hear that some in your community seem to care about conveying the nuance of sound.
Mhm.
That's really encouraging. It's when I think back to 32 Sounds, there's one of my favorite moments is where we watch John Cage perform 433 for the first time,
Ah,
arguably a composition that is John Cage sitting at a piano and doing nothing. It is a performance of silence. And I love all the meta ideas that that poses about what is music, what is art, and what does that mean to somebody who doesn't hear?
it's I'm going off the script here, but I've been thinking about this a lot, about what it's like to be congenitally deaf, deaf from childhood or um, from birth, because they have a completely different experience with life. I mean, they can, obviously, they know that there are vibrations, they can understand the intensity of sound, such as, compared to the intensity of vibration or light or something else. They also
Uh,
understand, the function of sound, what it's supposed to do. They don't know what whispering sounds like, but they know that it's supposed to be when someone doesn't want to hear you. So
But if you were deaf at birth, you don't even understand that subtlety of whispering versus open voice because you've never heard the difference. So
that
perhaps to even explain it in language isn't to explain it at all.
it's a difficult question. It's something that I still don't have an answer to. And maybe we should just ask those people and talk to them more, ask their opinion. It's easy to be sitting there and creating these captions thinking, oh, they are great. But how about asking the people who they are for, what they're like? It's like,
Yeah.
but
You know, there's so, God, my head is bursting with questions. So, of course, part of the art of what I do, among other things, is um, deliberately manipulating softness and loudness, quietness and loudness. And for a profoundly deaf person, all of that nuance is lost in the subtitling. How does one describe, and does it matter to a deaf person that you put loud explosion versus soft explosion? Does that matter?
I hope so. I mean, of course, before me, people have spoken to the communities of deaf and hard of hearing people and asked their opinion. And I think it does matter a great deal to be more creative and expressive, to add that nuance, because it makes their mind kind of run harder and kind of imagine more things, I
Hmm.
feel like. And it's actually related to my next question to you, because, let's keep to the script. We can talk about this. You are a nerd in sound, I'm a nerd in subtitling. And when two nerds meet, it can take like days of conversation. So my next question is about that one interview of yours that I found particularly cool. And in it, you talked about a few things, but among them was designing door sounds, which turns
Yeah.
out it's much more complicated than one might think. There is so much going in it. All the
Mm,
decision making, as you said,
mm,
well, what is the door made of? Is it metal or glass
mm,
or wood or
mm,
something else? Is it resonant or not? Is it hollow or not?
mhm.
To creak or not to creak? What is the door
Exactly.
handle like? Is it like this
Right,
or like this? What's
right,
behind the door? Is it nothing
right,
important or some haunted house? Or
right.
maybe some new world that is just opening up to the characters? And so
Mhm.
my question to you is, no question. Before that, I want to say that when you watch the movie with captions, usually all you will get is door creaks or door
Right.
creaks open, and that's it. Just creaks now. All that painstakingly crafted nuance is gone, and you get just creaking. So my question to you now is, well, doesn't that make you frustrated? Wouldn't you have something much more expressive, like door creaks eerily with heavy, uh, rusted screech, like that?
Yeah, I'm getting really frustrated. This is really hard. Well, of course, because that conversation, the conversation that might be actually recreated in the form of a subtitle, is a conversation I have in my head when I design. I'm
Hmm.
thinking linguistically before I I I create sonically. So I would ask myself those same questions in my language in my head. I'm in the scene, I'm looking at a door, a characters are about to open the door, and I think to myself, what do we want to hear? What sound will the door, what little piece of the story, and this should underline our entire conversation. Story as it relates to the narrative. What
Hmm.
is it that the filmmaker's trying to tell the audience at any one moment? And sound is always a part of the storytelling. It's a very subtle part of the storytelling, but as you've discovered, even with something as simple as a door, those sounds can tell you things without having to use words. And so it feels to me that it's incumbent upon a subtitler to kind of expand that universe for the reader to engage them that much more, to explain the story that much more.
Absolutely. This thing that you talked about before, when it's very simple, it's kind of a more traditional approach to captioning, dog barks, phone rings, those kind of things. Today,
Yeah.
people gravitate more toward this more artistic and creative approach. Maybe you have
Ah.
heard about this Netflix show, Stranger Things.
Oh yeah, I know it. I've watched it. I didn't watch the recent season. I watched seasons 1 through 3. Very good sounding. Pride. Yeah, really well. Good sound.
Well, yeah, in that last fourth season, good colleagues of mine, Jeff Tan and Carly Witkowska, they actually added these very, very creative captions that even went viral. People kind of talked about them on the internet a lot. And like, for example, tentacles undulating moistly.
It's beautiful. That's poetic.
It's a little kind of, disgusting even.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
guttural gargling. Like,
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
imagine these things.
Mm.
But to be honest, you kind of do something not too dissimilar when you name your sounds. I remember in your Tortured Memories sound collection, you have these names like Angry Sneakers is the name of a sound. Angry Sneakers.
Right.
Sneakers can't be angry, they're not alive, but you kind of made, or uh, teardrops, you named another. Well, teardrops don't sound like anything in life, they're quiet, but you made that connection between the sound and what it evokes in you, and also what you want to do in the textual representation, how you want to name it. So it's not too dissimilar. Maybe you could actually guide me through this process. How do you name sounds? What goes through your head?
The first thing that goes through my head is what does I ask myself the question, what do those sounds make me feel?
Hmm.
And that's very difficult being in what is arguably, some say that what I do is a technical craft. I consider it an art. And so it's hard for me to disconnect my emotional connection to sound from my technical connection to sound because I have this theory. I believe that when we engage in entertainment, when we enjoy entertainment, we only get one opportunity to have an original feeling about it. You only get one chance to see it something or hear something for the first time. And for decades, I never was able to register how something made me feel in the moment that I'm feeling it. And I'm learning to document my emotions with those first impressions. And so I'm big on first impressions. And when I hear something, what does it make me feel? And I try to translate that into a definable emotion. Did it make me, or sometimes it's simple. Did it make me feel happy, sad, elated, despondent? We can go through the catalog of emotions. And that often drives me to a description of a sound because I think when you're working in sound in my field at the highest level, sound has to work on a semiotic level. It has to work on a level that is conveying information without words. A sound can make you sad. A sound can make you happy. And so those are the associations I'm trying to leverage when I'm adding sound into a film, not just the diegetic information, which is if you see a gun, you should hear a gun. But I want the gun to tell you a story that's more than just the sound of an explosion. Is it a big gun? Is it a small gun? Is it a hero's gun? Is it the antagonist's gun? Sound can always communicate story in a way that speaks to us narratively and even emotionally. So when I describe sounds, I'm looking for that content first, and then secondarily, I'm trying to describe what it actually is so that it can be functional.
Hmm. Yes, I actually wanted to talk to you about this creative intent behind sound design. And okay, this question is going to be a little long, so apologies for that. Needs a little exposition just to give you the right context. And so, translators like to say that they don't translate words, they translate meanings behind those words. And
Mhm.
subtitlers, similarly, we like to think that we don't really describe the sounds themselves as we hear them, but rather what they're supposed to do. Because, the sound itself, it can be not that useful to describe it on its own. Like quite famously, you created this sound of the ornithopter, this dragonfly-looking helicopter in Dune. And as you were watching the movie, you believe that if that thing existed, that's exactly what it would sound like. It's completely realistic. But the truth is, you made that sound from God knows what, from
Right.
cat purring,
Mhm.
beetle wings flapping, and
Eagle
some
wings. Right.
beehive.
Right. Right.
And, if I add there at the bottom of the screen this text, cat purring, alongside, the
Yeah.
ornithopter, well, it will
Yeah.
be just silly and people will
Right.
think that.
Right.
But, so we have to go through for the meaning. The question continues. Um, and so, okay, there can be different meanings like realism, immersion, and so on.
Right.
And or it can be um, you know, mood, setting the mood. You talked about designing the sound of rain. It can be more dry or more wet. It can be more aggressive and sizzling in a scene about maybe some fight or conflict, or more gentle and
Mhm.
light in a romantic scene. And we need to add that to the
Mm,
caption that it's light
mm,
or sizzling to add to the mood. Or you can use sound for characterization. Maybe you can have a character who is larger than life. You would add some oomph and strength to the
right.
footsteps. You could add reverb and expansiveness to this voice. You could also do so much with sound. You can do symbolism, like in Taxi Driver, Alka-Seltzer. It sizzles the drink like the traveler's mind with
Yeah.
discontent and anger. And we have to know the intent. We subtitlers who have to kind of trace back your thinking process, the sound
Mhm.
designer, and it can be sometimes quite difficult. At
Mhm.
times you can tell, at times not so much. So my question to you is, please help us. What is your thinking process? What is your general approach to imbuing sounds with meaning in movies?
Well, it starts with a conversation with the director to fully understand the narrative intent of any given scene or act. Um, and so I can't begin designing till I know what the director wants to achieve dramatically. So that might mean um, deconstructing a movie with sound in mind so that I understand what the dramatic intent is at any moment, and when sound can either work with that dramatic intent or work against it, um, meaning contrapuntally, as we say in music.
Mm.
Sometimes I need to work against the intention of a scene to create contrast. So I can't begin designing till I understand what the narrative intent is and what the director wants to do. So let me let me go off beat for a
Mm,
second
mm,
and describe my wife. Um, my wife, and this I'm now I want to hear your response to this. My wife grew up in downtown Los Angeles,
mm,
a universe that is cacophonous. To live in a loft in downtown is to be subjected to constant helicopters and jackhammers and police sirens and homeless people,
right.
and it's a din, but it's a din that became the comfort zone for her because that's home for her. When we got married and she moved in with me, I lived up on a mountainside in nature. And
Mm,
that terrified her. The sounds of birds and silence was disquieting to my wife. Inversely, when I would stay over at her loft downtown, I was unnerved. The constant racket of sirens and people screaming on the sidewalks gave me anxiety, and I couldn't stay very long. And so I'm framing that by saying there we can use sound in a very direct sense, to inform the listener. But then there's this very indirect way of using sound that speaks to someone's circumstances. And I don't even know how you would qualify that because you would have to be listening very deeply. So here's an example. I did this movie about Whitey Bulger, the famous
Mhm.
Irish thug in Boston who terrorized the city for years. It was a movie called Black Mass, Johnny Depp movie. And here's a criminal who's running from the authorities his entire life. And the symbolism for the authorities are police sirens. Whenever Whitey Bulger's on screen, I imbued his universe and only his universe with sirens close or in the distance because he's so sensitized to being caught. He's thinking they're one step away from him because there's a policeman right out there. And so we created this ambient environment for the character to personify his anxiety. But how do you put that into words? Because we feel that as an audience. We're put on edge. We're given a little bit of anxiety through using sounds like that in a film, but it's almost inexplicable in words.
You would think, but you have to have a deep vocabulary, a very deep understanding of cinema. We'll talk about this later, of different stages of it. So as a subtitler, you have to not just be a wordsmith and library worm. You have to know how films are made, how to analyze them as an
Mm,
analyst, and read
mm,
beyond what you see. Understand, shot composition, generally cinematography, sound design too, writing, everything. And then you can make these decisions on what matters more. And this is very funny that it actually goes directly into my next question. What matters more? That's basically the idea is here's the deal. As a subtitler, you can't add all the sounds that are there.
right.
It's impossible. There are too many usually. And also, I remember there is this YouTube clip about creating sound design for a car chasing scene in the movie Ford versus Ferrari.
Mm,
And they showed, I think it was in Pro Tools, the audio software.
yeah.
Um, it was dozens and dozens of tracks playing simultaneously. A bunch of them for the car, the engine, the clanking and everything, a bunch of them for the audience and cheering and all these people and the environment and everything.
Mhm.
There's not enough time in the scene to add all of those in the captions, not enough screen space. And people don't want their eyes to be glued to the bottom of the screen. They want to watch the movie. So what that means is as a subtitler, you have to say, okay, here are all the sounds I can discern. And I will say, these are more important. I will keep them. These are less important. I will leave them out.
Right.
Meaning, we have to understand which ones are more important, which will depend on their creative intent. And that is tricky because it
Mm.
doesn't really often depend on the volume. Sound can be pretty quiet, but it's very important. And uh, it's so again, my question to you is, well, what is your strategy for layering sounds in terms of this importance? What is the hierarchy? Or do you do that at all?
It's essential to be successful in my field. One has to constantly evaluate what you want the audience to hear and how you achieve that through the manipulation of perhaps hundreds of layers of sound. I learned a valuable lesson from George Miller, who directed Mad Max Fury Road. He drew on a whiteboard for us what he called the pyramid of importance.
Hmm.
And he said that in any given shot, in any given beat in a motion picture, you want the audience to be looking at one thing and hearing one thing.
Hmm.
And that is our goal as artists to determine what it is that we want the audience to be paying attention to and listening to. Then below that, like a pyramid, you have the cornerstone at the top, and then maybe you have two subservient sounds that might support that primary sound. And then there's everything else that's the foundation of the pyramid. And so we learn to abstract from any given moment in a film dramatically what is important, and that's what we want to focus on. So, and sometimes that is in an additive process by adding a sound to draw the audience's attention to what we want them to hear, even if it's something you don't see. And sometimes it's subtractive. So here's another example of narrative storytelling that might be very difficult for a subtitler to ascertain. I
Mm.
did a movie about a woman who's going through menopause, and she's really struggling with it. She's feeling herself aging and not feeling relevant, and she takes herself to uh, she rents a villa in Italy, and when she upon arrival at the villa, which should be a vibrant, verdant environment, we took out what we should be hearing, which is beautiful birds chirping in nature all around her, and we leached the scene of those sounds to be consistent with her inner dialogue, which is, I am barren, I am without life, I cannot give life. Therefore, her environment reflected her inner feelings. And so we tell stories through addition and the subtraction of sound. And this is a crucial component of what we do.
Right. Well, we do describe that in captions. You would be surprised. We have
I
to.
would.
Be-
Okay.
I can give you an example. Mm, In Terminator 2, there is a factory fight scene between T-1000, the liquid metal cyborg, and T-800, Arnold. And in that scene, they deliberately made the sounds such of the fight that there is no human struggle sounds. There are no grunts. They removed all of that just to convey this idea that these are lifeless cyborgs. They don't feel pain. They just are fighting. And we captioned that at a particular point. You say that you use the correct, you have to not over describe it, but also not under describe it, not make it too obvious, but also give some idea that it is quiet struggle. So it's possible, but sometimes it can be pretty challenging. Yeah. And speaking about challenges, another question. Um, In captioning, sometimes challenges are kind of clear cut. We talked about creative intent, we talked about prioritization, I call it, or just the simpler thing like making sure that there is enough time for someone to read a subtitle before
Mm,
it disappears, giving it enough display time, making sure it doesn't appear and disappear at the wrong moments and distracting. But sometimes there are challenges that are they're frustrating because you feel kind of powerless that something will be lost no matter what. So, for instance, always I struggle with visceral sounds like
mm,
nails on chalkboard.
yeah.
When I hear that, something is like goes like this inside me.
Mm,
And I can write, okay, it's a gut-wrenching sound, soul-piercing, whatever. It's not
mm,
going to have the same effect, unfortunately. Or I think you know very well that in horror movies, they add this so-called infrasound, low, drony rumble that induces anxiety in you
right.
on a
Yeah.
physical,
Right.
physiological level.
Do you know why that happens?
No, not quite.
That's biological and evolutionary. It's what that's a semiotic association from our ancestral past when that infrasound actually signified danger
Hmm.
in the form of a volcano or an earthquake. And
Okay.
so we have we humans have 100,000 years of association to that rumble, meaning something dangerous is going to happen. But we've disassociated itself from its origins.
Hmm.
Now we play the same infrasound in a scene where there is no volcano or earthquake
Yeah.
to indicate to trigger those same primal responses.
They are not triggered, I think, in deaf people, unfortunately. Again, it doesn't matter what I add to the subtitle. I can say all the bombastic things and something's lost. Also, I'm struggling quite often with Mickey Mousing or any rhythmic match between the sound and what's going on on the screen. Because how do you do that? You know, beep, 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 beep. And it's hard to put that in words. Sometimes I can, sometimes it works out,
Give
sometimes.
me an example of that. I'm not quite, because Mickey Mousing in my vernacular is a musical term when a composer tracks movement
Yeah,
with the movement of the orchestra. But is that what you're referring to?
in a sense. So I remember there is this scene in one of the Spider-Man movies, there are many of them, when it goes, he is climbing the wall, and each
Ah,
time he puts his hand, there is a sound. Or the
yeah.
beginning of the movie Baby Driver. I
Mm,
think it was the beginning, or at least one scene where the guy just, does this to the music.
right.
And how do you say that it is matches to the music? You can say that, but sometimes again, it's complicated. There's
Interesting.
dialogue. You want to include dialogue. You want to include sound. And what else is difficult? Well, many other things. Anyway, my question to you is, what are some of the most challenging sounds you have designed in your career, and which one are you most proud of? Eh,
The easy answer is the most challenging sounds in terms of a specific single sound and not a genre
mhm,
is creature voices. I've spent 50 years designing sandworms and gremlins and any one of a number of crazy invented creatures that don't exist. And the trick for creatures, especially ones that need to be anthropomorphic, meaning having human-like qualities, is finding the balance between animal and intelligible, unintelligible and intelligible, and how much we want to imbue a sense of sentience, meaning having a mind and the ability to critically think, and finding that balance between how much of it is creature and how much of it is human, or is it somewhere in the middle in this humanoid nether zone.
mm,
Those are the hardest because everyone has a different idea of how intelligible a creature should be and how much sentience they should convey.
mm. And I remember you spoke about creating the voice for Dune. Please tell me about that.
Well, that was quite difficult because Frank Herbert describes the effect of the voice rather than what the voice actually sounded like when you were in the room hearing it. He talks about how one invokes the voice and summons the voice such so as to have dominion over the adversary by summoning the voice and deploying it like a weapon. One can control the mind of their adversary, but he never described what it sounded like. So our first experiments with the voice were developed around using the voice of Timothy Chalamet, and processing it so that it would be you'd still understand the words. He would invoke some kind of command, but it would come out in some otherworldly way. So we added reverb and delay and electronic processing, and God knows how you describe that in a subtitle. And all of that felt gimmicky and just uninteresting, and it was something that we felt, well, we've heard that before, and so we thought, well, how can we deconstruct this so that the voice says something more on a higher level about what's happening. So we realized in the lore, the Frank Herbert lore, only the Bene Gesserit knew how to invoke the voice. And the Bene Gesserit are an ancient collective of powerful women, high priestesses, if you will. And we thought, well, there's the secret. To invoke the voice is to summon the collective voices of every Bene Gesserit that has ever come before you. And therein lay the power, is you are not summoning a voice, you are summoning a cacophony, a coven of voices, and using that in a powerful way to overcome your adversary. So we thought, okay, we're going to do a couple of things. First, we will revoice the character.
Hmm.
So we took out Timothy Chalamet's voice and we introduced the voice of a powerful female warrior, a Bene Gesserit queen, if you will. So we thought that speaks to already a body of lore from Dune that anybody that knows the books could appreciate. And immediately now you're drawn in, oh, Bene Gesserit. He's part of the Bene Gesserit order by summoning the voice. And we gave that woman, we cast women with deep authoritative voices that could speak powerfully and as if a ruler or a leader. But then we added another piece of subtext to it. The voice is an acquired skill, just as any other weapon, like sword fighting, is an acquired skill. So at the first time you sword fight, you're not very good at it, and you won't strike your target. But so too with the voice. The first time the voice is emitted from you as a novice, it doesn't come out in sync. It comes out, your mouth opens. If you remember, in the first time Paul Atreides uses it, his mouth opens and then you hear the voice because he's not a master yet. And throughout the film, we created this sonic arc where the more he practiced the voice, the more it came in sync with his actual mouth, which meant that the Bene Gesserit order is so powerful they could defy the laws of physics. So that was the third subtext of how one uses the voice.
It's incredible. I'm just stunned. It's so cool.
How do you describe that?
I don't know. I don't know. I would have to sit there and be very creative. Actually, I would probably spend at least a few hours with my vocabularies and dictionaries and how do you respect so much craft going into this thing and kind of portray it correctly. Well, somehow. I also wanted to talk to you about songs because in captioning, we sometimes have to do that with songs. We either, there are options. Either you can describe the song in general terms, like, okay, you can say crunchy rock and roll, or
Right.
some sort of a light synth melody or something, or cool jazz. Or
Right.
you can add the lyrics, or
Mhm.
both, or maybe sometimes nothing at all. If it's just a very backgroundish, irrelevant thing and there is dialogue,
There's a radio playing or something.
yeah, it's kind of a mood thing, but not too much.
Yeah.
But again, we have to figure out what that song is for. It can be again the mood, it can match something what's going on in the screen, it can be elusive, or maybe it can, what is the right word? It can foreshadow something that will happen soon.
Mm,
So
right.
there are many intents behind song, and I wanted to ask you, well, um, uh, what goes into choosing the song that you want to choose? What is your thinking process there?
Well, you might be surprised to know that I very rarely have input in those choices. There's usually very often in Hollywood films, an individual called a music supervisor is hired, who is an expert in this area, a person who works with the director to find out what the emotional intent is for a song, and then goes off and either and it's a person who has an encyclopedic knowledge of everything that's ever been recorded, and can then very fastly translate the director's need into a song that perhaps no one has ever heard of, but speaks directly to the emotional intent with either lyrics or the melodic or harmonic content. And this is an expertise of music supervisors and music editors, individuals who live and breathe music every day and can bring a novel song uh, that all of a sudden a scene comes alive when you've introduced a song that maybe we remember from 50 years ago or last year, uh, but they remember it, but you didn't because they're experts in that field. So I don't make those decisions.
It's important to remember that, sound is not just the sound designer. You have Foley artists, you have,
Correct, correct.
mixers, you have the
And music
composer,
supervisors, yeah.
many people. All of
Yeah.
them are important. I said that you're the mastermind. Maybe that's true, but there are many other brilliant
Well,
people.
I am often asked by a director for my input on a musical choice, but very often there's someone with far more expertise than I uh, that can help make a better decision. I mean, I'm a musician. I've written many songs. I've written songs for movies as well. So it's important to be there in the trenches with the filmmakers because you understand what they're trying to achieve. And sometimes I'll, hey, you know what? I want to write a song for that. I'm going to put a song on the radio there.
Yeah, I know you play guitar. You're a musician yourself, somewhat.
Indeed. Yes.
Um, yeah. Okay. Moving on. Um, I also wanted to ask you about AI. You wrote about it in your blog, and it's the top of mind for our profession as well. We all are a little bit anxious. People say we're gonna be replaced, particularly when it comes to dubbing and voiceover. There are many new things there. So, what is your kind of attitude to using AI in sound design and also maybe voiceover and dubbing?
Mm. Boy, this is another hour of conversation. Broadly speaking, I think I embrace AI and I embrace it in a number of different ways.
Hmm.
Let's just speak and let's sort of under the umbrella, under the rubric of if humans are anything, humans are beings that believe that we can improve life with technology. And so I am not the person. I mean, fire was invented and it was a good thing. The Gutenberg press was invented and it put monks that hand wrote books out of business. The buggy whip was driven out by the automobile. The horse and wagon was replaced by the automobiles. All I'm trying to draw is an accelerating curve that shows that we as a species embrace tools because we are tool using animals, and that will never change. And so for me, AI is a tool. Now, that being said, how can we best embrace AI, and what is the best way to embrace AI? So, for example, when a film is, let's say we're making a film about cavemen, and we shoot out in a jungle. The sound that's captured in that location probably will be polluted by air traffic and vehicular traffic and horns honking, but the camera's looking at a very pristine location. So that sound that's captured when the film is made is not usable. In the old days, we used to have to bring actors back and do ADR to replace the sound because you can't, those sounds were anachronistic. They're not part of that era. Now there are very sophisticated AI-based tools that can clean out the sounds that you don't want while retaining the voice of the actor. So on a mechanical level, I'm embracing AI technology to aid in doing what I'm doing. Next level up, rapid prototyping. There are AI tools that can design sounds.
Hmm.
So sometimes I will avail myself of an AI tool to rapid prototype to help me get to an idea quicker rather than me prototyping slowly with my meat brain. An AI might be able to generate quickly 25 ideas. I can pose a challenge, a sonic challenge, and AI will look through the large language models and propose 25 possibilities faster than I can think of those 25 possibilities. I don't use those sounds, nor do I use those ideas. I use those ideas to drive or allow those ideas to trigger an emotional response inside of me that says, "Ooh, that's a good idea. That's the path I want to follow." Because sometimes I'll follow a first instinct and it's a dead end. And now I've wasted a lot of time. So sometimes AI can get me closer to the real idea that I want to pursue. And then I pursue it with all the zeal that I have using my own instincts. But AI got me there faster. So it makes me better at what I do. Now, in terms of, let's talk about responsibilities. I think we owe each other as artists through any community, any artistic community, not just sound, to respect each other's creativity and our abilities to have work. The big fear is that AI is going to put subtitlers and graphic artists and sound designers and actors and visual effects artists all out of work. And so I think first and foremost, when we approach AI, we should be always be thinking ethically about what the consequences are of using AI. So for example, I'm often asked to use AI to replace an actor's voice, but I won't do that. I think I have an ethical responsibility to that actor to give them the option to agree to or not agree to having their voice replaced with an AI clone. And as long as we adopt an ethical approach to the use of AI, I think we're in a better direction. Now, in terms of a job loss, much like the Gutenberg press replaced monks writing books by hand, so too will prompt writers replace people who are doing rote work mechanically. So while some individuals will lose work because it's predicated on a mechanical skill, it creates new job possibilities for those who know how to write prompts for AI tools. So I'm not convinced that AI is this evil job displacer. I think it creates possibilities for individuals to develop even greater skills in the AI economy if you're willing to embrace them.
Very well said. I agree. And actually, what you said kind of applies to subtitling too. We want
Ah,
to be ethical. We don't want the machine to create sound descriptions, but we can use it as a tool. I sometimes use it. I will just describe the scene and what emotion I want to convey and ask it to give me some ideas for descriptions or for just adjectives or, something juicy. I'm probably not going to use it, but it will give me ideas and save some time or effort and maybe
mm,
even make it a little bit better at times. Not quite often, but sometimes. But
yeah,
the ethical aspect is very important.
I think that's vital. When I think about it, I forget the exact words that you just used. How does one describe with words a deep rumbling gurgle in the throat? You had said something like that. And
Yeah.
AI would never create a verbal interpretation or a word interpretation of a sound effect like that. So it made me think what in my idealized world, the people that employ us will still give us the one day, the 1 week, the 1 month, the 1 year to do the work we've always done. If AI can facilitate the mechanical work
Mm.
faster, it gives us more time to spend on the harder work, which is the creative stuff. It gives you more time to sit and think, how do I describe a gurgle in the throat in a way that will be most effective for my audience? So by minimizing or mitigating the mechanical work we all have to do in our jobs, AI frees us to do the stuff that's the really fun part of what we do.
That's the ideal. But then there is capitalism and
Well,
company.
but then there's Gavin, so I know I'm naive, I'm an idealist, I'm a hippie, yeah, of course.
Oh, but it's good. It's good to, to dream and I'm very similar to that. There's the practicality, but there is something to dream about. Um, and, talking about dreaming again, for somehow magically things just go one question into another very smoothly. Um, in some interviews, you have spoken about uh, working at Hanna-Barbera and that you felt like a sort of a assembly line factory worker. There wasn't much creativity. It's just you added all these cartoony sounds like boing to
Yeah,
to where they needed to be. And then you saw Star Wars and what
Mm,
Ben Burtt did with the
mhm,
soundtrack there, and the light bulb went off in your head, and you said, okay, this is what I want. And also, I want to sit down with the director and with the editor and create the sound together.
mhm,
And that's what we want the captioners to have, that kind of access, maybe to the director, but also the sound designer. That
mm,
when
mm.
does that happen? Did you collaborate and talk to Matt for 32 Sounds or anyone? Has that ever happened?
No, it has never happened. The closest I have ever come to interacting with a subtitler was second or third hand. On the first Gremlins movie, I remember Joe Dante showing me the transcription, the initial English transcription of the movie dialogue. And that transcription was incorrect. Words that people spoke in the movie were not the words that were written in the transcription, and I always assumed that that transcription is a tool that is given to the subtitlers to begin the process of subtitling. So it, no, I've never directly worked with a subtitler, and it's never occurred to me that that's a valuable a potentially valuable collaboration. It would require a studio to see a financial benefit in it because I've never seen something like that budgeted either. And so to incur a new expense, movies are expensive enough as it is, you'd need to be able to justify its value.
Well, yeah, idealistically, that would be great to make sure that these captions capture your creative intent as best as possible. But yeah, financially, I guess we have to do some convincing to be done.
Yeah.
Oh well.
But gosh, you've given me such a good, that's a really interesting conversation I want to begin having with my directors
Mhm.
because none of us have ever considered, and I can't wait to sit down with my favorite directors and say in post-production, hey, you ever read the captioning on our films? Do you ever approve them? I think there's something really valuable here in making sure that's right. And it always conveys not only the literal words, but the tone and feeling of a scene, which is the hardest part of captioning.
Absolutely. And it's easy to go wrong. For example, in Taxi Driver and Alka-Seltzer, it's sizzling, but I can use a different word. I can say fizzing. A
Right.
drink can fizz, but what about
Yes.
your mind? Is it fizzing? Is the connection made there? It's very easy to make mistakes. A sound can, for example, in a movie can be a leitmotif. It can recur to connect parts of the movie, or it can evolve that sound throughout the movie to show some evolution.
Right.
I can miss that if I don't know the movie or just cinematography, cinema, and
Yeah.
and then that's lost for the deaf and hard of hearing viewers. So having this conversation is useful, but it doesn't happen ever, basically, with some notable exceptions.
Yeah. It's funny, I've been writing a book and I was just writing a chapter on Star Trek 4, the Star Trek movie about saving the whales. And there's a famous visual effect in the film. It was one of the first ever computer generated graphics.
Hmm.
And do you know the movie?
No, no, Star Trek.
Okay.
I know.
So ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, created this shot, and it was one of the first. And the filmmakers were besotted with this shot just because it was CGI, and the audience is going to be amazed by this shot. And they never thought about the sonic potential of this shot.
Hmm.
But you made me think of it because you have to be aware of sound as a leitmotif. On that shot, you saw all the members of Star Trek, Captain Kirk and Dr. Spock and Bones and Uhura, and each head came into camera and then disappeared, and then another head came up and disappeared. All it was almost like a bust, like a statue of the character, and they recede. Beautiful shot. And I thought this was an opportunity to presage information you're going to receive later in the film. So I took key phrases from each of those characters from later in the film, and I placed them on this shot as each character approached camera, as if we what I was doing was laying clues for the audience. If you were really aware, you were listening, and you'd realize when you heard the line later, oh, that's what Kirk heard in the dream sequence when we saw that visual effect shot. And so, but it requires you to be really listening and paying attention. And it just occurred to me when you said this, how would a subtitler indicate that?
Carefully. You, I would go about this way. So if you have a leitmotif in the movie, you just use a very peculiar word and you don't change it. And then it can, for example, right? I can give you a million examples. In David Lynch's Twin Peaks season 3, there is this static crackling of electricity. And whenever we hear it, we know that that other world is close. So it's a kind of recurrent thing that indicates something. So what would you do? You would use very particular combination of words every time this appears, and it would be the same every time. So there would be this connection, and leitmotif can be all kinds of leitmotifs can happen.
Mm,
Um, but beyond that, you also as a subtitler need to just know a lot about cinema. I remember in the movie Le Haine, the French one, there is a scene that directly is an homage to Taxi Driver, where he says, "You're talking to in front of a mirror. You're talking to me. You're talking to me." So you need it's a French movie. You need to translate and caption it exactly using you talking to me so that the viewer understands it's Taxi Driver homage. If you choose any other combination of words, it's lost. It's now
right.
we don't know
Of
that it's
course.
Taxi Driver.
Right.
You have to be careful. And it's just much people think, oh, captions, you just transcribe the
Yeah.
dialogue and add door creaks and that's it. There's so much nuance. There is so much to think about and be creative, just like you.
Mm,
So,
mm,
and I think I wanted, you know, you quite often speak about this, the importance of knowing, having deep knowledge beyond your domain, beyond sound design,
mm,
acting, cinematography, lighting, writing, maybe
mm.
even costume design, and things outside of production, just
Right.
in life.
Right.
And I think it's the same for captioning, for subtitling. The more you know, the better. Could you speak more on the importance of this interdisciplinary approach?
Sure. Um, there's every aspect of cinema is an expression of someone's artistic interpretation, whether you're a costumer or a cinematographer. And just as I've given you some interesting examples of how sound spoke to the narrative of the film in ways that maybe even you hadn't been, and you listen in ways that you weren't aware of. Um, all the crafts are doing the same thing, and I've always felt that when looking for inspiration and looking for storytelling ideas, if I can interpret the cinematographer's intent through light, what he shows or doesn't show, what's in focus and what's not in focus. All of that, all of those words now begin to translate into sound when I think of well, wait a minute. The cinematographer is not focused on that, but is focused on that. What does that say about the story? And how can I now interpret sound in a similar way to create a similar level of focus or lack of focus? Just as the costume designer uses colors and fabrics to speak to who that character is. They're telling you things without words. This is all semiotics. This is all metaphor. And it's all a great place to begin to discover unspoken storytelling in ways that help inform you to tell your stories with your tools in a better and more effective way. So, sure, it's easy to see the intent of an actor in the way that they speak words and how their bodies move. It's easy to see the intent of a director on screen. it's less easy to see the intent of all the other artists that are contributing to a scene visually and sonically. So I've always felt that if I could learn to interpret, not be a master of, it's not important to be a master of them. It's important to be have an understanding of how those artisans use their tools in a way that informs what I'm going to do. And I can be a more effective and nuanced storyteller in my domain.
Definitely, I fully agree. But for subtitling, of course, I don't know much about sound design in that regard. But let's say I want to learn more about sound design. What books or other resources would you recommend? What are your go-tos?
Well, I'll tell you the first. Well, do you want to learn specifically about sound design?
Yep.
Well, I'm not an expert on in this area. Um, I would recommend that anything that Walter Murch has written um, beautifully about sound's contribution to cinema
Hmm.
from a very artistic point of view, mostly in published articles in magazines. I think his books. I don't think he's got a book specifically about sound, but there are hundreds of articles that he's written that are really important. I would also recommend reading anything by Randy Tom, famous sound designer. He's written a great deal on his blog. He's got a great blog. I don't think he has a book either, but I've found public those items the most illuminating because most of the books that I know of are are for lack of a better word, mechanically based. They talk about the mechanics of sound, about here's how you use Pro Tools, or here's how you use a microphone. And I never speak about those things. I think that you'll develop those skills. The mechanics of what we do are the easy part. The hard part is the development of our inner artist and how we learn to interpret and express ourselves with our tools. And so, for those reasons, I would recommend learning screenwriting before you read a sound design book. And as you know, I took improv comedy classes for a year
Oh,
because I wanted to learn how to express myself in that way. So the books, for this reason, I'm unsatisfied with conventional academic approaches to sound design because in the academy, in quotes, sound design is taught as a mechanical skill, as okay, you have to learn to use these tools, and here's how you build a soundtrack, and here's what they're going to expect when you get to the mixing studio, and this microphone has this kind of polar pattern, and all of that to me is boring, 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 boring.
I'm I'm s- I'm exactly the same. In universities, not all, but many, also subtitling is a very technical process. They have their software. You put the so-called in time here, out time here, and now it appears, disappears. You click the button here, and I'm like, it's a creative process. Think about it in a more artistic way, the cinematic way. Be a polymath of the different things in cinema making. And so I can completely agree with you. I'm
I mean,
actually, yeah,
everyone has to learn the mechanical skills, but they're the easiest part of the
yeah,
job.
of course.
But if that's all you are, you're undifferentiated from everyone else that wants to do the same thing. If you want to be great at something, there has to be a meta level to what you're doing.
Absolutely. Now I'm all out of questions, actually. This is it. And this has been a fascinating conversation. And thank you so much for joining and sharing your beautiful knowledge. And have a great day.
Thank you, Max.
Take care.
It's been a pleasure.